Namaste. Uh, I would like to start by thanking the enormous work Dr. Janak Pandey has done, not only for the association, but for the growth of psychology around the world. I met Janak many years ago in the 1980s as we were both part of the International Association of Cross-Cultural Psychology. And since then, we have had a very profound and deep friendship, and I appreciate all the work he has done. I have been called a professor. That's probably what I dedicate most of my time to. And you will probably understand that in India. In psychology, we're first professors. Research comes as a second step. And basically, we end up being storytellers. So I'll tell you a couple of stories. First, under the leadership of Christine Roland-Levy, several years ago, we had a meeting in Montreal to discuss how international societies are really. And one of the things that we found out after going over 80 different societies that called themselves international is that most of their congresses, 90%, were held above parallel 30. And most of them were in the summer of the North. And we asked ourselves, where is psychology practiced? And I would say that psychology is practiced mainly in majority countries and researched in minority countries, that is, the developed countries. So we thought it would be essential that we have a psychology that is really international. And in that sense, although many of these societies call themselves international, I should say that the past president of IAAP, José María Peiró, is from Spain. Boucher is from China as the acting secretary past general. Christine Levy is from France. Janelle Gautier is from Canada. So you can see that there is a flavor that goes outside of those countries that speak mainly English. Now, why would we want to have a psychology that is based on evidence? And for that, let me tell you a short story. About 18 years ago, the very conservative government of the United States, led by George Bush, was very worried about the number of divorces in the States. So he asked his minister in charge of family affairs, a developmental psychology by the name of Wade, to create an initiative for healthy marriages. And Wade put this initiative through their Congress, and he obtained $150 million a year for a period of 7 years. That's a lot of money. What would you do with so much money? Well, you have to have something that works. So they looked for people who did research on couples. And they found a professor at the University of Denver, Scott Stanley, who had been working for 25 years on commitment and communication in couple relationships. Based on this, he created a program that's called PrEP, something like preparing couples to have positive relationships. And they started using this as the main intervention. It's an intervention that should last at least 8 hours if you want to receive money. And it has many exercises. I'll just give you an example of one exercise. There's one thing that's called the floor. The floor is a little square, like this one. And this is the exercise. I take the square and I give it to my wife, and she tells me everything she wants to tell me. Then I take the square and I tell her everything I understood that she wanted to tell me. Then I give it back to her, and she tells me everything I really understood about everything that she really wanted to tell me. Do you like that for your couple relationships communication? I see some smiles. That doesn't necessarily mean you like it. So they started to use it. And when they did the evaluation, they found out it wasn't working for many people in the United States. The problem is that there are many. There are 50 million. They're called Hispanics, all the people that came from Latin America. So they called me, they asked me to come to Washington and give them a talk on culture and couples. And after we talked for a long time, we came to the decision that the problem was that they didn't know anything about Hispanics, because all of the research with high internal validity is done with university students. External validity, we don't know. So we did a study in the state of Texas, it's in the south of the United States, and we did 75,000 telephone calls to make sure that we could get a sample of 4,000 people who agreed to talk to us for an hour about their couple relationships and then pass on their partner so that we could talk with him or her for another hour. We had an oversample of 800 people with a Spanish surname. Once we did this, we made the comparison between those who came from the US, Anglo-Saxons, and those who came from the Hispanic area. And they found no differences. And they said, Rolando, you were mistaken. But we knew that not all the Hispanics were the same. Some come from first generation, second, third, fourth, and there's something that's called acculturation. Each of us learns our norms, values, attitudes, beliefs through the process of socialization, growing up in a particular space. But what happens when I'm 18 and I have to move to another culture? Then we have acculturation. I can become like the people to where I moved, assimilation, or I can take some of my things and some of the things of these people, accommodation, or I can just reject the new group. In fact, there are people in Chicago that have lived there for 40 years and don't speak English. They only speak Spanish. They rejected or they were marginalized. So we asked them, do you speak only English or only Spanish, more English, more Spanish, your customs, your food, your friends? And we created a scale that went from assimilated to rejected or marginalized. And we found differences on every variable, significant differences. So we started to look at this very carefully. And we found out that depending from where they came, they had different characteristics. For example, the people who came from the far south, Chile and Argentina, they had university studies, they lived in places where there was 2 or less people, and only 1.2% of the females were pregnant. When they came from the Caribbean, 2.8% were pregnant. They lived in houses with 4 or less people, and they had high school studies. When they came from Mexico and Central America, 12 million of them, they only had 3 years of school. 10%, 1 of every 10 females was pregnant, and they lived in houses with 6 people or more. Now, one of the things that we can ask are, what are the beliefs of these people? And Diazz Guerrero, one of the professors that Janek just mentioned, did studies starting in the 1950s, and he found something that he called the historical psychosociocultural premises, the norms and beliefs of the people. And what he found for Mexico is that the norms and beliefs are 3 cardinal prepositions. The first one, man is superior. Father is superior. The second one, female should sacrifice for the family. And the third one, children should obey their parents in exchange for love and protection from their parents. I don't know if this sounds familiar to you. Now, what do you think are the beliefs of people from Mexico and Central America who have 3 years of schooling? Where did they learn their way of life? In the family. So they believe these 3 things. So now, I go and visit one of my friends in the United States that came from Mexico, and I'm talking to him, and the mailman comes in and he wants to give him a letter. And he doesn't understand anything because he doesn't speak English. All of a sudden, a little boy or a little girl, 6 years old, comes in, talks to the mailman, and then sits her father or his father, and explains to him what he has to do with the rest of his life. What did we do to the structure of power of the family? We just turned it on its head. How does this man feel? I don't get any respect from my children. And my wife goes on to the school with my children, and she learns words like empowerment. So my wife doesn't respect me either. So how do I respond? I get a little violent. And since I'm being violent, they take me to a special place where there's a magnificent program called PrEP. It's been translated. It's no longer the floor. It's el piso. And when I get there, a psychologist, female, comes out, gives the floor to my wife, and says, "What do you have to say to your husband? Does it work?" I don't get any respect at home. I don't get any respect here. But it's based on 30 years of evidence with Anglo-Saxon couples, middle class, who think that the more important part of communication is reasoning. And what we know from our culture is that the more important thing is how you say it. If I say my love before I say anything else, it's okay. If I'm violent when I say something, even if it's a positive thing, it doesn't work. So, we need evidence to be able to create efficient practice. That means that every one of us, to be a good professional, has to know science. But it has to be a science that is based on evidence that's ecologically based. If we don't do that, then we're not ethical. We don't consider cultural variables. We're not good psychologists. So why is this international association so important? Because it understands that we are a global people, but that we need local solutions. It understands that we have to go everywhere and take good research and do good research in each of these places. So part of its moving forward is going to those places where normally we do not have international congresses. South Asia, Africa, Middle East, Latin America. So this is the purpose of this society, which you will not find in many other international US-based societies. So I would like to invite you to come and share with us this centennial, which we're starting here, and we appreciate your being here with us, and we hope that we can have you when we can have you come to Mexico at the end of the centennial in December 14 to 17 in Cancun, Mexico. And one of the things that we say, just to finish, in Mexico is, when you really are committed to something, you put your shirt on. And this is the shirt of the Congress.